Uh, Many reports said that the first case of COVID 19, that at the time was called coronavirus, appeared in Wuhan on December 12th, 2019. On December 12th, 2019 was the 5 year anniversary of a major report provided by the Congress in the United States concerning cybersecurity. It had very important implications if you actually read through it. See, I contend that things like certain kinds of hearings and certain kinds of congressional actions are actually benchmarks as part of the capital outlay process of the federal budget. And so when these things occur, if somebody takes out securities on them or puts notes on them or puts them in part of a financial portfolio, then there's certain time frames or certain economic events that have to correlate with them at very important stages. And if they don't, then there's some form of default. And with all that was happening, especially at various times connected to the date of December 12th specifically, that there had been coded this aggregation and accumulation of defaults that could be leveraged in very significant manners, including manners that impacted the safety of women and girls, and manners that were incredibly racialized. For instance, I was in Houston when I watched a Tong set up a bunch of hits that were later leveraged to secure victory for political candidates that, if nothing else, were financed by people who had a vested interest in the success of this Tong's activities. That was 2 years before, it was 3 years before this, and 2 years after that specific report on cybersecurity. As a matter of fact, a lot of how I believe this COVID 19 is being operationalized is through cyber threats. And it's intentionally happening because there's a misrepresentation that these cyber threats and cyber attacks are some form of health malady. And that has been allowed to accrue for the last 10 years so that medical insurance can be billed as a way to launder other assets to open up a new insurance sector in the privatization of cyber insurance, which previously was characterized primarily under terrorist risk insurance paradigms that had lots and lots and lots of federal coverage after 9/11, but are strategically being redelegated and redesignated to private insurance brokers in manners similar to the few other federal insurance programs. For instance, the federal flood insurance program. So, December 12th is a very, very important date in that regard. Apparently, December 12th is also the day that the 1985 Budget Reconciliation Act got passed, which had the effect of raising the debt ceiling to, I believe, $2 trillion or $2 billion, a very significant amount more than it had been. I think this is of concern and absolutely relevant right now because former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, was on the record of challenging the last time that the federal debt ceiling was raised. Because one of the things that happened when the federal debt ceiling raised, which I did not learn about till recently, I did not know at the time. At the time, I was working as a civil in a public department in a municipality in California. But at this time, they were talking about this. They were discussing the raising of the federal debt ceiling, and one of the things it was discussing was the manner in which it was going to impact military pension funds. My contention is that what happens when debt ceilings get raised is that it puts pressure on other areas, including areas of the budget or other sectors that get a lot of financing that might be characterized under different line items. So, for instance, the availability of military surplus. If you're talking about a need to maybe draw on or attempt to reallocate or leverage a pension obligation connected to the military pension system in the course of addressing pension obligation in other sectors that might impact federal employees. When you raise the debt ceiling, it's going to create a certain kind of pressure to make available other resources that would otherwise be within a specific pension system or a specific sector that's supposed to access pension benefits to other sectors. And so, talking about raising the debt ceiling and then trying to recalibrate pension schemes in that regard actually becomes a matter of national and international security. And if in part of the refusal to take responsibility for the fiscal malfeasance of Congress and the representatives of that are allowed to be represented as legislatures is that we've accrued a federal debt so significant that it has compelled us to leverage access to resources that should not be leveraged by other sectors, i.e., laundering assets from the military pension system into civilian pension funds, including law enforcement pension funds, or via association in particular municipal pension portfolios that allow for some circulation of benefits between things like municipal workers, fire department, and the police, the redistribution of military assets to police assets so that it can be recirculated to municipal workers and to the fire department. Then you've actually created a massive breach of national and international security. Now, if you have a problem with the preponderance of funding of the National Security Administration, whether it be surveillance under the auspices of intelligence or national security relation in that matter, or the DoD appropriations for the military, I absolutely support you 100%. But when we refuse to hold the federal government accountable for an appropriate budget process, one of the things we refuse to do is address distinctions in various elements of the budget, including things like research and development. And if at some point they can violate very important laws around disclosure of use of products, including research that one might perform in a university or as part of a university program, which by law, by an amendment called the Mansfield Amendment, they are required to get your consent to use any academic or other research for military purposes. And if they don't do that, then they violated the law. But if they've been able to pressure, especially public universities, or if they've been able to pressure public medical facilities or public health facilities, including by access to the pension funds for those public workers, to keep quiet about lack of informed consent by participants in that research project that's being coded under Department of Defense appropriations, with an understanding that increasing the overall debt will allow for a kind of pressuring in the leveraging that will recirculate certain military assets into the civilian sector to be acquired via the pension systematology by civilian interlocutors, including ones that are supposed to be addressing public health or supposed to be addressing public education. Then we have the massive failure and breakdown of the civil structure of the United States and the constitutional structure of the United States at a very profound level. And so when the former Speaker Boehner was talking about these problems with the debt ceiling, I believe that's exactly the kind of thing he was trying to talk about. But in the course of that happening was also the rollout of the Affordable Care Act and the situation with the Medicare system and Social Security system and the state marketplaces and the attempts that were being made to leverage all of that in consideration of dealing with the financial sector and actually allowing Congress and Treasury to work in manners in conjunction with what was going on in the financial sector in manners that were completely unconstitutional. I've been reviewing the primary source documents myself. What Congress did, what Congress allowed to happen with TARP was 100% unconstitutional, and nobody has held them accountable. And I believe what's happening right now is that there are certain intercessors that have inserted themselves into Congress and the Senate and other state and local government structures that are working a sort of strong-armed tactic in trying to leverage the fact that what happened during the 2008 banking bailout, including what happened with the healthcare sector, the so called healthcare sector, that they're leveraging that to try to defraud the federal government even more and allow for the recirculation of things they have no business messing with. And part of the way they're doing this is they're giving young people, especially, that haven't gone through the appropriate processes, that haven't applied the appropriate standards, that don't have the appropriate security or safety mechanisms in place, and don't have the appropriate credentialing to access them in the field, real time, under the cover of an emergency situation. These kinds of things have rolled out over the course of the last couple of years. But when you have the mayor, the governor, for instance, of Texas saying to people that are students in nursing or medical technology that he's going to call them up and allow them to participate and perform as if they are given the backing of somebody that's fully qualified to perform that medical role because it's an emergency situation, that's the kind of thing that needs to be backed up. That's the kind of thing that should be seen in the field real time. And while we're talking about first responders and we're talking about trying to get Medicare waivers, who is actually in the field making sure these people are applying appropriate policy? I'm just saying. I was trained as a disaster service worker. I know I've been out of work for a while. But if they can call people out of retirement and they can call up students, why has not one damn person contacted me to say, hey, you had experience in emergency preparedness and prevention. We need you to help here. They haven't done that. I've seen what they're actually doing. And what they're actually doing is nothing close to what would have been an appropriate procedure for responding to an actual pandemic situation. So what are they doing? Have you looked at some of those things that they're trying to do under the auspices of COVID relief? There's a lot of obligation floating around. I want to know who thought it was a good idea to go all the way back to December 12th of 1985 with a 23 metric